Sometimes, life pushes some men to reach excellence, only to bleed them dry and ruin them afterwards. And perhaps that is why it makes them great. One of those men who life made great and then reduced to nothing was Juan de Fuca. A son of this island, a son of the sea, a maritime pilot of the ships of Charles V and Philip II, the first European to explore the icy coast of the North Pacific and discover the unmapped lands of Canada from the west. Juan de Fuca left this island to sail in search of his destiny, and after he had fulfilled this, he came back 40 years later, poor and deceived, but alas, too late to regain his losses and his old hope. And like so many of his contemporary navigators, Columbus, Elcano, and the Great Captain, Juan de Fuca is a chapter all by himself in the history of ingratitude. But his case is also an example of the ingratitude of history, because unlike the others, history inflicted upon him the injustice of being consigned to oblivion. That's why I believe it is worth trying to rescue and preserve his memory. But what do we draw on to rescue his memory? On very little, actually, I'm afraid, as often happens. His name appears on some maps. There is a plea for the king, which, if it were his, he would have signed it as the Captain Juan Griego. And there are some more traces of his, under this or different names, dispersed in both space and time. But the main source where we find a reference to him is the account of a mysterious encounter in Venice. The report is written by a prestigious English merchant, navigator, and consul called Michael Locke, and submitted to the royal court of Queen Elizabeth, in which he related that he had met a man whom he trusted and was willing to help, that claimed that he had found a navigable channel connecting the North Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. This report, written in Michael Locke's own hand, includes a handful of short letters exchanged between himself and de Fuca, sent from Cephalonia and Venice respectively, about planning an expedition to the Northwest Passage, which was never made. These were rescued from oblivion as if by miracle, were transcribed into a peculiar work that aspired to relate all the marvels and the futility of the world as seen by those who down through the ages sailed to the far-flung corners of the globe. Here's its cover. It is called Pilgrims, and the author is the learned Samuel Purchas, who wrote it after thorough study and in collaboration with Richard Hakluyt, England's most reputable geographer. Surprising as it may seem, in the manuscript there is mentions of the legendary journeys of Aeneas, Alexander the Great, St. Paul, and of the voyages of his contemporaries, such as Magellan, Cavendish, and Drake. These few pages constitute our primary source about Juan de Fuca, the only beam of light. The rest is just a glint of light, a challenge for researchers, a doubtful and fleeting glimpse like those undefined creatures that appeared on the maps of his time. There is no depiction of Juan de Fuca in history, neither face nor voice. If we were to give him voice, it would be just fictional. That's why, in order not to fall into the category of historical fiction, we can only imagine him silent, as a mute presence. a man in his 60s after his homecoming to his island while recalling his adventures, and still cherishing the hope that he would one day achieve his feat. Of Juan de Fuca's sayings and writings, none has survived or has not been found so far, and the lack of any relevant source is making the work of the historian even more difficult. From the available bits and pieces of information, we gather that he could tell us of his adventures that began in Venice, Cephalonia was under Venetian rule back then, and of his voyages across the Mediterranean on Venetian galleys. He could relate his arrival in Seville in mid-16th century, his wedding in Palos de la Frontera, and how his skills as seafarer made him a master of the fleet de tierra firme. We do know that 2 years later he began to explore the ocean and set sail to the New World. There is evidence that on October 2nd, 1561, he was promoted to pilot of the Indies in the fleet of New Spain due to his experience of the currents and winds in both North and South Seas, the Atlantic and the Pacific. Sadly, history has not preserved any personal recollection of this Greek seafarer about his numerous voyages on ships carrying gold and silver from the New World to the Old One to keep afloat the Spanish Empire. However, we do have the names of the 2 vessels he served as master, La Trinidad and Santa Maria de Begoña. How interesting would it be to have a first-hand account of the ambitions, the injustice, the intrigue that undoubtedly surrounded those expeditions, of the growing rivalry between Spain and England for control of newly discovered lands, and also of the excitement of living in a time when year by year the world was getting bigger, of the emotion of opening up new paths, of navigating by the stars under different skies, and of the astonishing impact of the discovery of the new virgin world, inhabited by creatures never seen before, brimming with life, not like the old one, and where everything seemed to have remained as it was in the days of the creation. Actually, what we know about Juan de Fuca are bare facts, and going any further would mean to fictionalize, not to write history. There are also some telltale signs that he fought on board the galley Real of Don Juan de Austria in the famous naval battle of Lepanto, which took place not far from here, but even so, at the moment, it is impossible to verify this. However, what we can confirm, Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa bears witness to the fact, is that on December 1578, Juan de Fuca was taken captive in Valparaiso by the much-dreaded Francis Drake, who had just sailed through the Strait of Magellan and was determined to circumnavigate the earth for the second time, rather for the sake of his own glory than for England's. No doubt the maps and knowledge of the Greek seafarer were valuable to the English pirate who kept him enslaved in his service while taking over Spanish ships and gaining a wealth of treasure from them. After 70 days, without having any hint of the reason, Drake set de Fuca free at the port of Callao, and he headed north with 22 tons of gold and silver in the hold of his Golden Hind. 10 years later, de Fuca was once more captured by another pirate, this time by Cavendish, another English pirate, much less considerate than Drake. This happened near California, when Cavendish, coming from China and the Philippines, took over de Fuca's galley Santa Ana with all his fortune he had saved until then. 60,000 gold ducats. De Fuca swore eternal hatred to him. And it might have been that hatred that made him accept the impossible mission to find the Northwest Passage. The discovery of the Pacific implied that America and Asia were two separate continents. Therefore, if they were separated in the south, then they would be in the north as well. Consequently, there should exist a maritime passage in the north, like the one existing in the south, a point where the waters of the Atlantic and of the Pacific would meet. That means a maritime passage, a shortcut which would shorten the traveling distance between Asia and Europe. Back then, on maps issued by some cartographers, it was displayed as a sea passage supposedly linking the oceans above the Arctic Circle. Its western entrance was called the Strait of Anian, probably taking its name from Ania, a Chinese province mentioned in a 1559 edition of Marco Polo's book. Thus, people conjectured that if one sailed along the Pacific coast northwards, he would eventually reach the province of Ania, where the passage opens towards the Atlantic. Many attempts were made by navigators to discover the Northwest Passage. Some sailed from the Atlantic, others from the Pacific. The expeditions led by Cabrillo and Ferrelo reached the 40th parallel north, and they say that Drake managed to get as far as the 42nd north, but none had ventured to sail further north. That was the challenge Juan de Fuca took on. To navigate towards the unknown north, to sail a sea nobody had sailed before, without maps, buoys, or lighthouses, without any knowledge of the currents and winds, through completely uncharted waters where there might be only ice. His journey would be the counterpart of Magellan's, to find the Northwest Passage as Magellan had found the Southwest. And his only reward would be to get back the 60,000 ducats that Cavendish had stolen from him. He never got back that sum, but he was commissioned to carry out the expedition, twice actually. The first time, he was commissioned by the Viceroy to discover the passage and secure it against the English. He set sail with 3 small ships, a group of 100 soldiers who had no idea of seafaring, and a Sodomite chieftain. Soon his men mutinied against that chieftain, and De Fuca was obliged to return to Mexico. The second was soon afterwards, in 1592, this time with 2 ships, a caravel and a pinnace, together with a crew of sailors. After this voyage, Juan de Fuca returned to Acapulco, convinced that he had found the Strait of Anian. But the Viceroy only rewarded him with honors. He received a lot of them for 2 years, and then the Viceroy suggested he should go to Madrid and receive his reward there from the king himself. He went, but did not receive payment either. He was probably not even believed. He attributed the lack of interest of the king to the fact that the English seemed to have abandoned the plan to find the passage. The mere thought of having to waste 2 more years waiting made him tired, so in disgust, he decided to return to Cephalonia, to live there to the end of his days among his family. And precisely it was during that homecoming journey when that crucial encounter with Michael Locke happened in Venice. It was there when the correspondence began, first with the Queen Elizabeth's court, and later between Locke and De Fuca, between Venice and Cephalonia. Locke is so sure of De Fuca's honesty that he does not hesitate to write to Richard Hakluyt, an authority on explorations in that era. To Sir Walter Raleigh, promoter of New World colonization. And to Lord Cecil himself, the Queen's right-hand man and Treasury Minister. His letter reads as follows. He indicated the course on my own map I had laid before him, telling me that he had sailed along the coast up the 47th parallel north, and that between the 47th and the 48th there opens a large stretch of sea, partly enclosed by land, which he entered and navigated for 20 days or more, sailing around numerous islands and noticing how it was getting larger and larger. He also said that at the entrance of the strait there stands an outcrop in the shape of pinnacle, and that he had disembarked at various places where he had met people clad in animal skins, and that the soil is fertile, abounds with gold, silver, pearls, and other commodities, like in Nueva España. He said that he had to come back because he could not secure the passage against possible attack by the indigenous, and because he feared the ice of the upcoming winter season. Despite the fact that the project to explore the passage was not officially backed, Locke never gave up the intention of financing it himself. In the following years, others tried to find the Strait of Anian, with England offering a reward of £20,000, but none of them succeeded. This failure aroused doubts in many whether de Fuca's voyage to the north really happened or it was just invented by Michael Locke. It must be noted that more than 2 centuries passed before the doubts faded. In 1725, the St. Petersburg Academy put Juan de Fuca's name on the map. In the summer of 1797, the English navigator Charles William Barclay rounded Cape Flattery and sighted an unknown dry land. His young wife Frances noted down in her diary.
In the afternoon, to our great astonishment, we arrived off a large opening extending to the eastward, the entrance of which appeared to be 4 leagues wide, and remained about that width as far as the eye could see, with a clear westerly horizon, which my husband immediately recognized as the long-lost Strait of Juan de Fuca, and to which he gave the name of the original discoverer, my husband placing it on his chart.
The Barclays saw the unmistakable pinnacle described by de Fuca standing at the entrance of the channel, and recorded its latitude at 47 degrees 47 minutes. That rock was perhaps the irrefutable proof of the veracity of his story. Later, they saw the stretch of sea and the islands he had seen, and others after them saw the fertile land, the furs and animal skins, the gold of River Fraser, and the mother of pearl of Abalonishal. The Barclays took de Fuca out of the uncertain territory of books and placed him in the real world of navigation. The Greek-Spanish navigator might be less renowned than Magellan, but no less bold. He did not find the Straits of Anian as he believed, but he was the first to get that far up north looking for a new passage. He did not lie about his voyage, and he explored the Pacific shore of the future Canada. In his time, the Northwest Passage did not exist. We had to wait till 1903 when Amundsen, who also discovered the South Pole, led the first expedition to successfully traverse Canada's Northwest Passage. It took him 3 years in a shallow draft boat to sail that stretch through the shattered sea ice. Who would have told us that the mythical Straits of Anian really exist? Due to the effects of global warming in the Arctic, the fabled Northwest Passage opened completely. This was the Arctic Sea's ice minimum extent 5 years ago, and this 2 years ago. And before long, the passage would be fully navigable and would cut the distance from Europe to the Far East. And there are plenty of natural resources, and of course global strategic interests. Certainly Juan de Fuca wrote an important chapter in the history of the Northwest Passage, but there are more waiting to be written. The Barclay's accidental discovery corroborated de Fuca's account of his discovery regarding geographical features. Then, it was history's task to investigate and definitely confirm the very existence of the explorer. Some historians doubted the expedition undertaken by Juan de Fuca and went even further, putting in doubt his very existence. They all claimed that in the Spanish archives of that period, there is no record of his voyage.
But this does not mean he did not exist. In fact, geography proves just the opposite. Who could deny the existence of the outcrop and the channel, the numerous islands and the richness of the region? Besides, we know from reliable sources that entire archives were missing or destroyed, and many documents and maps were stolen. But that was classified information, state secret.
When Locke's account became public, Juan de Fuca was considered a traitor by the Spanish, ready to sell secrets about his discovery to the English, the foes of Spain. For fear that somebody else might do it, it is not surprising that they destroyed everything related to it. Of course, things would have cleared up if they had sent someone to investigate in time here in Cephalonia. And this is what the American historian Alexander Taylor did in the mid-19th century. He financed the then honorary consul of the USA here in the Ionian Islands to investigate in situ the matter. Spiridon York, locally known as the consul, traced Juan de Fuca's family tree, found a biography published in Venice by a clergyman named Mazarakis, and talked with de Fuca's relatives, who were poor seamen and not only remembered their famous ancestor, but also knew of his friendship with Locke. An unequivocal and undeniable answer to those denying his existence. All the names York refers to in his correspondence are recorded on the Codex of the Church of Mavrata. From those documents, we learn that his grandfather fled Constantinople before its fall in 1453 and settled in Cephalonia, in the valley of Eleon. There, he had 4 sons, Stephen, Emmanuel, Hector, and Jacob, the last one being Juan's father. All the Fokas of Cephalonia are descended from the same Byzantine family, and there are still many residing on the island, and of course many buried in the cemetery of Mavrata. There is an open-ended question on this subject. Where is his resting place? The Greek-Spanish navigator had the middle name Apostolos and a second surname Valerianos. Valerianos indicates his birthplace, Apostolos invoking the Holy Apostles, the patron saints of his Byzantine family. This cemetery occupies the place where the old church of the Holy Apostles stood in Valeriano, damaged by the 1953 earthquake. After the demolition of the dilapidated church, a new one was built next to it, and a curious relief like a gravestone was transferred and placed on the floor of the nave as omphalion from the old one. The stone bears the double-headed eagle, the Byzantine dynastic emblem, holding a laurel wreath. Originally, the slab indicated a tomb in the center of the old church, and not an omphalion. Who was then buried under such a gravestone? Certainly an important figure. Which one of the Fokas? His grandfather Emmanuel? His father and his uncles? Or maybe Juan de Fuca himself? His fellow countrymen dedicated an imagined bust of him years ago, solemn and enigmatic, resembling Columbus. Both in Apostoli and Vancouver, the Federation Odysseus raised two identical busts, more humble, more Greek, like a Homeric sailor. But the investigations carried out by the Consul York on behalf of the historian Taylor spring one more surprise. Eleon is a lovely valley on the island of Cephalonia, covered by beautiful olive groves and luxuriant cultivated fields that with their rich greenery defy the scorching sun and the shriveled up soil. Almost in the midst of the valley lies the village of Valeriano, Juan de Fuca's birthplace. And there stands an old house on a small promontory, gazing out on the surrounding landscape as far as the eye could see. That house, I was informed by the locals, supposedly served as a dwelling for Juan de Fuca, where he retired after all the tribulations he had faced in his life, to bask at last in a happy and peaceful home. About half a mile away lies the village of Mavrata, where his descendants live. Like him, most of them are seamen and quite poor. Juan de Fuca spent the last 6 years of his life waiting for the sporadic letters that Locke used to send from Venice. They would arrive with the Cherub, the Minion, or other ships that docked in the harbor of the neighboring island of Zante. One of them should bring the news that the funds had been raised, and so they could embark on the journey to the Northwest Passage. And he was ready, and had recruited 20 real sailors, all of them fellow countrymen. But from day to day, and from month to month, the time went by. The ships came and left, and the long-awaited letter never arrived, and his life was nearing its end. As an irony of fate, in June of 1602, Michael Locke disembarked in Zante with the money he had finally collected, asking for the captain. "He is no longer with us," some answered. Others said, a decrepit old man who had lost his mind. Ioannis Fokas, Greek navigator. Juan de Fuca, Spanish navigator. Pilot of the Indies. Born and died in Cephalonia. Men are mere mortals. The land remains. History investigates, corrects itself, rectifies, and continues its course.